Good morning. It is about 10:27 on a Friday. TGIF everyone. Hope everyone in the World Wide Web is having a good time. And this is the first snowy filled weekend, or at least that's coming up apparently. So that's pretty exciting. I had my first today's my first official. It's not snowing here in the big city of Northport yet. It's like a few snowflakes, but just got the first call since I started my new job at the awesome Montessori school here in Belfast. And today is a snow day, so it's my first snow day. So that's pretty exciting. Wonderful place. I just started working there about 3 4 months ago, and it's awesome. I love it. It's everything about it is great. It's one of those jobs too where I feel like when you know when people quote unquote have their day job, and they get to a point, or most of the time it's to kind of essentially to pay the bills, pay the rent, pay your property taxes, all the fun adulting things that we have to deal with when we're older. And so it's paint. You kind of go in, it's paint by numbers. Sometimes you have a job that requires a lot of you know re- mental awareness, and then some jobs you have where you can be pretty brainless, especially in the service industry to a degree. But I've been fortunate to the last 10 years, 10, 11 years, I've been working in the school industry, and it's been great. I've been working at different capacities, mostly working at a teen center, and then just recently I started working at the Montessori school in Belfast, and it's pretty amazing. It's one of those jobs too where I feel it's got a high flexibility thing around it, around my schedule for me to attempt to have this music career that I have. But it's one of those jobs where I feel like I go into it and I'm actually excited to be there. I look forward to going there every day, and I love the people there. I love the kids. It's a beautiful facility. It's super close to my house. It's literally a 5 minute drive to my house. It's kind of a dream, and and then it's also a thing too where I leave work and I'm pumped up after I leave work. I'm not like tired and out of energy and exhausted, and I don't feel like I come home and I'm feel dirty and I got to take a shower and all this kind of stuff. I feel just positive when I leave, and then really positive when I go, and then really positive when I'm there. It's a really great thing. And it's a thing for musicians and people who have music in their lives to a degree where they either they are full time musicians, or they're like kind of like weekend warriors where they get together with their friends and maybe play the occasional gig, or people who are more uh, invested in it where they're making a living to a degree with it. And it's always a thing of like trying to find that balance, financially, of because we live in a seasonal place here, and so that affects musicians quite a bit. There's a lot of musicians I know that have the fortunate situation where they're able to make their income solely off of music. I've come really close to it, and I pretty much have for periods of my life. But it's always, it's a tough thing with the whole situation, as far as like with summertime versus now. This time of year has actually been pretty good, surprisingly so. But it's nothing usually like how it is in during the summer, at least how my situation is. So it's always a balance. But it's been great. So um, and also with quantum, that whole thing where I'm trying to, you know, with this summer, felt like it felt like we built a lot of cool momentum and had some really fun shows. So I'm in the midst now doing some more shows, or putting together some more shows around that Ben's, or around this time of year, to try to keep up some kind of momentum. Felt like this year was just a really fabulous year. So, and we had a new album come out. We have another album that's all recorded, so we'll probably put that out next year, probably in the springtime, summertime. I'll probably do like another album release show. And so, and the next show we have coming up is on the 13th of January, with my friend Tom Luther, who is an amazing musician, really great friend, somebody I look up to in so many levels, and on so many levels. So yeah, and then as far as film fanatic stuff, I'm lining up some more. Like I've said before, I really love the interview segments. That's my favorite part of this whole thing. Just I love that give and take. I love getting having dialogue and getting a different perspective, either especially from people who work in the industry to some capacity, whether they've been an actor or worked on sets. So I've worked with a few people where I've had on the show who work in the kind of music department of films, where are they have experience working on documentaries or films, doing scores and music. And then also I've had a couple of people on the show, on this channel, where they've have lots of experience as actors in the indie horror world. So it's a lot of fun. So I have some more guests that I'm working on getting on to get on this show, and to try to always keep with that theme, and to try to keep growing with that aspect of the channel. So I really appreciate the whole thing, and then all the feedback that this channel's been getting. It's been really awesome. Just had another video that crossed the thousands. That's in the thousands views range now. It's got over 1,000 views. And I did a show. Basically, the whole show was something. It was a lot of the times when I'm doing these shows, I'm not planning out too heavily what I'm going to do. I try to keep things loose to a degree. Try to keep it relaxed, but I'm trying to keep things more focused. I try to keep things, a little bit more concise with the shows, to try to keep it a little bit more focused. Sometimes I can go a little bit too all over the place, but I try to keep it more. I'm trying to keep things more concise. And I've been doing these like specialty shows outside of just the regular reviews. And I did a show that was based on, and it was all about the whole kind of Avatar phenomenon with James Cameron. It's been a lot of things on my mind about that. I've been kind of in that world a lot by watching and reviewing Aliens. I did a big show on that whole franchise, and then I did a show on James Cameron as the director, and I kind of did a show about his career, especially his early work, which I really love. And then also now with the new Avatar movie that's coming out, I believe tonight, it opened last night. There's been all this talk and hype, and all of this new talk and discussion about Avatar that came out, the first Avatar that came out about 15 years ago. So there's all of this, reemerging hype and talk about the film. So, it's kind of been on my head a lot, in my brain a lot. So I did a show where I just talked about that, my own personal opinions. And I felt like I probably got into some things that were, well, at least from what I gather, the general consensus is, or at least in regards to that, I'm kind of the black sheep as far as my opinions, and I'm not really a part of what everybody else is saying. So I just needed to talk and vent about that, and that was a lot of fun. And it's great that people seem there's some folks out there that seem like they actually care about maybe what I'm talking about, for what it's worth. So this is a show today on a movie. Again, I love finally getting to movies that I've been wanting to do for a while, and I've been doing that the past few weeks. This is no exception. This is one of the movies I've been wanting to talk about the most. And this is a movie called The Beast and the Magic Sword. I did a little review of this back when I was just doing Facebook Live videos. and I did a post on this incredible movie, and I also did a live video. So this is the first for this channel. I bought this, um, probably bought this a year ago. This was a movie I've never seen before, and this is a label, Mondo Macabra. You probably can't see it right there. Mondo Macabra is one of my favorite labels as far as putting out all of these great, super obscure exploitation horror movies. Just an amazing label. This label, Mondo Macabra, and also Blue Underground. Those are my two favorite films. I mean, two favorite companies that reissue all of these great underground classics. And this movie is just amazing. I'd never seen this movie. Most of the titles that I've gotten through Mondo Macabre I have not seen. I might have heard in passing over the years, but it's a whole other world of all of these just incredible, just these incredible and just completely fabulous, sleazy, low budget grindhouse movies that are just fabulous. This movie came out in 1983. And basically the story is it's centered on a man who becomes a werewolf, and he travels to feudal Japan to find a cure for his disease. And it was directed by Paul Naschy, and it came out in 1983. And this movie has so many elements. It's got like the science fiction element, it's got the pure horror element. It's an amazing, just on its own as a werewolf movie. It's one of the best I've ever seen. It's definitely one of the best werewolf movies I've ever seen. But it's also got martial arts involved, and it's completely bonkers crazy. It's like a fusion of like science fiction, horror, and martial arts all together. And it's got all this kind of mysticism around it. And there's this amazing scene that a lot of people know of this scene in the film, but there's basically a scene of where Paul Naschy's character, who's the werewolf, he's captured and he's kind of put into this cage, this big giant cage, and the people who are his captors, they take a lion and they throw him in this cage, and there's this whole scene of where his character like fights to the death. He fights this lion to the death, and it's one of the most epic scenes I've ever seen in movies. Like you literally see a werewolf fighting, you know, this full on, you know, monstrous lion, and it's just so epic. And it has all these great elements with the martial arts. In the samurai play, there's really great samurai fight sequences and choreography, and that's fused with the whole kind of werewolf lore. And it's got this real sleazy kind of sexy element to it. Also, it's really funny. It's super low budget. It's super cheesy, but it's also just so there's so much imagination on this screen. It's a beautiful visually. It's beautiful, and it's one of the most. I have to say, it's one of the most like utterly original movies I think I've ever seen. I mean, when you take those three elements and those three, you know, genres essentially, and fuse them together. Like I've never seen a movie like that. And Paul Naschy is somebody I recently got into about a couple of years ago. He was a real famous director and also actor in the Spanish exploitation world. He's mostly well known as he's kind of known as the Lon Chaney of Spain, which is really interesting. He was the first movie I saw that was starring, and I believe he directed it, that starred Paul Naschy, was this movie called The Howl of the Devil. I have that also on Blu-ray. I have a few of his movies now. Some movies that he's directed and then some movies that he's starred in. And that movie is it was it was my introduction to Paul Naschy as a director and also as an actor, and that movie really is just kind of an amazing thing to check out. I kind of feel there's a lot of his films I still have not seen, and I'm slowly getting to most of them. I'm starting to buy more of his films. Basically, I'm trying to get anything that he was involved in because I think they're all pretty solid, all pretty amazing. And he bounced back and forth through his career from being a director. He also was involved with writing a lot of films. He starred in tons of films, and he was known as in the whole exploitation world, especially in the '60s, '70s, and '80s, predominantly in the '70s and '80s. He was known as kind of the Lon Chaney of of the exploitation world as far as all of the werewolf films. He made many films where he played the Wolfman, and he made many werewolf films. Howl of the Devil, which was the first movie I saw of his, and I believe he directed it. That movie plays out like the best way I can describe it, and it's great. It's got that movie also has lots of elements. It's definitely a horror film, but he plays many different roles in that film, and I kind of feel like that movie has this quality to it that it's like a love letter to all the monsters, all the classic Universal monsters. There's scenes in it where he plays Frankenstein, Dracula, the Mummy, and the Wolfman, and it's like a love letter to all things Universal. There's a really amazing interview with Paul Naschy on that Blu-ray package, which is really awesome, and that's going to be a show I will do in the future. There's a really great interview with Paul Naschy. He died fairly recently, like about I think maybe 10 to 12 years ago, but he had an incredibly long career, so prolific, so many movies he was involved in. And he kind of reminds me another director that I recently discovered, another well, actually Spanish director, James Franco. Probably one of my one of my favorite directors right now, and he was a director. He was predominantly always a director. He did I think he did make appearance in certain films of his, but he was also Spanish. But he is notorious for having, probably arguably the largest body of work of any director that I know of. But he was a specialist in the world of all things exploitation. He made lots of horror films, but he also crossed out of that genre. He made many other non-horror genre films that were definitely in the exploitation world. And I see some interesting parallels between Paul Naschy and him just because of the level of work that they turned out and the quality of work, and then also the diverse, kind of how diverse their work is. It's pretty astounding. But in this interview, Paul Naschy says like his biggest influences, as a kid and even up, to when he was making all of these movies, when he was like, really a major player in the whole exploitation world. His biggest source of inspiration were the Universal monsters, particularly around Lon Chaney, and who played the original Wolfman. And he felt like he wanted to always pay tribute and homage to those films, and in particularly the early Lon Chaney movies, which were the first werewolf movies ever made. Even to where the makeup and the way he would apply makeup and the special effects that were used in in that film and all of his other werewolf movies that he's made, where basically he's using like patches of fur and hair, just like the classic Lon Chaney, um, you know, effects. So even to where he adapted and adopted a lot of the same kind of mannerisms of how the wolf would react, and also how he would carry himself in the film. Super cool. And he, would always say in these interviews of where he felt, this was his, you know his biggest source of inspiration for, kind of carrying on that torch. Just fabulous. And he was born in 1934, and he died actually in 2009. And again, other things too around this movie, The Beast and the Magic Sword. Most people regard this as probably his greatest movie, and I think also, well, there are some really awesome special features on this package that are just totally killer. And Paul Nash himself even refers to this movie as being like his, he felt like this was his, you know, his like greatest role, his best film. And I believe this film was also like his most made the most money out of his career. It was probably the biggest film uh, out of all of the films that he's made. And again, his uh, his track record is just legendary. Track record is just incredible. Rojo Sangre was a movie he made, which was a later movie in 2004, which is wild. Lycanthropo, which came out in 1996. The Howl of the Devil, which was the first one the first movie I just talked about, the first Paul Nash movie that came out in 1987. That's an amazing movie. It's got some scenes in it that are just completely disturbing, and of course, Beast and the Magic Sword, 1983. Just so many Panic Beats, which came out in 1983. Virtually the same year. He just turned out and cranked out so many movies. It's amazing. He made another film called Return of the Wolf that came out in 1981. That's another like classic vampire movie or werewolf movie. The Canterbrians, which was a cannibal, or actually I should say, an adventure story that came out in 1980. La Cruz del Diablo, and this film came out in 1975. Exorcismo, which came out, another film came out in 1975. It's amazing too. Like he was so prolific. Like he had, most directors now and for that matter actors, put out a film maybe every few years. Maybe at least 2 or 3 years. Like that's maybe the average time span. But he was so prolific. Like he just was a crazed like workaholic, and like he sometimes put movies like 2 or 3 movies out in the same year, which is just crazy. Like just went one to the next, from one to the next. Fury of the Wolfman, which came out in '74. Curse of the Devil, that came out in 1973. So now we're going back to the more old school. The Crimes of Petite, which came out in '73, and this movie, The Crimes of Petite, is a more of a giallo film. So he like I said, Paul Nash is mostly he's most well known to be for all of his werewolf movies, particularly The Beast and the Magic Sword. But he made dozens of werewolf movies. But he also crossed out of the did things that were not exactly horror, like he did these giallo films. He did a lot of crime exploitation films. Horror Rises from the Tomb, 1973. So many films. It's mind-boggling. So many of these films I haven't seen. He also did a version of the Dr. Jekyll and the Werewolf, which was another one of his werewolf movies, and that came out in '72. Just amazing. The Wolf of Walpurgis, which came out in 71. Seven Murders for Scotland Yard. And also, again, another movie from 71. And it's considered to be like a Spanish giallo film. Just amazing how many how many movies he put out. Assignment Terror, that came out in 1970. It's essentially, that movie is like where he basically plays Frankenstein. Frankenstein's Bloody Terror, speaking of Frankenstein, this movie came out in 68. Just amazing. So many titles. Inquisition, 76, 1976. Night of the Howling Beast, which I've heard is really great. A lot of these films I haven't seen. And then also Night of the Living Beast, which came out in 75. Just amazing. So one of the things I've talked about with this channel is, and then within the last few years I've been buying, I've been slowly buying more and more of these films, and especially like getting into, like, really taking a deep dive in the whole exploitation world. It started off with movies, like I've said before, the whole like resurgence for me came out of, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago when I was Apple Moose Music and I saw the original The Car 1977 with James Brolin. When I saw that film, which that was a movie that is definitely one of the greatest like exploitation movies ever. That was a movie that I used to watch all the time. And then during that time, and I couldn't believe it when I had it on Blu-ray, and the packaging is just amazing. I did a show on The Car pretty recently. So it started off with that for me, for getting bit by this bug of all things exploitation, was The Car, and then another movie which is my favorite exploitation movie, horror exploitation movie, The Tourist Trap. I love that movie as a kid, and when I saw that on Blu-ray, I was just blown away by that. And then so that led to more and more movies, buying a lot of Lucio Fulci movies, and then again it was all movies that I grew up watching. And then from that I was reading about a lot of these different directors and movies that came out at that time, and it turned me on to all of these other movies that came out during that time that I hadn't seen, and that I maybe missed it. And so Paul Naschy was one of those guys. I discovered him through that kind of the same situation, and also like all of these films that a lot of them I haven't seen before. So just amazing. So just open up this whole world of all these new possibilities of new things to check out. So that's one of that for me is that's one of the most enjoyable parts of this passion or hobby of mine, is that not only do I get to revisit and buy movies that I grew up on, but it opens up the world to films that were in those genres at the time, and certain films that were even more obscure that I didn't get a chance to see because of how they fell into total obscurity. So it's just an amazing period to be checking out all these movies and all these great reissues. This is one of the best. This movie is just so incredible. I have some more Paul Naschy films in my collection, and I'm slowly buying some more. So I'll be doing some more. I'll be doing The Howl of the Devil soon. That's such a great movie. Um, yeah, so I kind of feel, if you don't know who Paul Naschy is, like myself, I didn't know who he was. I wasn't familiar with him at all. The first one, the first of his movies was The Howl of the Devil. That was a movie he directed. That's a really great, amazing film, and I felt like it was a good introduction to what he was. But I kind of feel like this would probably be the best for anybody who is looking to take a deep dive into particularly werewolf movies. And, really anything in the horror exploitation world. If you're looking to take a deep dive and discover, an actor or a director in that genre who is, in a lot of ways not well known, and you want to like learn more about that kind of genre where a lot of the stuff came from, and just check out all these fabulous movies. I think this would probably be the best. This is probably, from what I gather, is like supposedly the best of his entire collection, and as far as a director and as a writer and just being an overall character. I've always been like, as far as the Universal monsters go, my introduction to Universal monsters was I remember as a kid seeing Boris Karloff as Frankenstein. Iconic, just amazing, and always one of my favorite characters. And then I got into Dracula, Bela Lugosi. That was another big thing. But I remember when I discovered Lon Chaney as the Wolfman. It was that movie, and then also The Creature from the Black Lagoon, which I feel is a movie that is should be included more, and also The Invisible Man. But I found myself really gravitating, especially towards the Wolfman movie with Lon Chaney. And I love werewolf movies, and I really love vampire movies. I have a huge collection of vampire movies. I have a pretty good collection of werewolf movies. As far as monster movies, and particularly like characters or monsters that are, you know, taken from or part that are a part of the Universal canon, Dracula and vampire movies and werewolf movies have always been my favorite thing. But I have a little bit of a deeper love for werewolves. I just love that. There's something about the werewolf mythology that is so interesting. There's something about it that I feel is like directly related to us in a lot of ways. The psychology of it, the 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 traces and how it's traced to like the basic human instincts. Because I regard, at the end of the day, I regard man as just being an animal, and so I really look into that connection, and that there's like a little bit more uh, of a of a lineage that's tied to the whole werewolf lore. So I've always gravitated towards that more. I've just always loved that more. There's, in comparison, there's been obviously vampire and vampirism in film is probably the biggest in the horror world as far as monsters. That's like the biggest thing, and there's like millions of vampire movies. There never seems to be enough werewolf movies. Although there are tremendous, you have tremendous movies like American Werewolf in London, Silver Bullet, The Howling, and also now, since I recently discovered this, The Beast and the Magic Sword. It's one of my favorites, and there's quite a few others. But in comparison to say the whole, like, if you look at the entire scope of how many vampire movies there are, there's not nowhere near as many. But I've just always felt more drawn to the whole like werewolf aspect of it. I've even like probably my favorite werewolf movie is probably The Howling. That movie just totally gets under my skin every time and just gets me pumped every time I watch it. I actually wrote a movie, and again, this is like totally related to the quantum thing. I actually wrote a song, I should say, where it's basically about a werewolf. It's basically about a guy turning into a werewolf at night, and him, more or less talking about it from like his perspective. And so I wrote a song for Quantum a couple of years back, a few years ago, that is actually, it's a song that's on the Quantum album that we still haven't released yet. Actually, we have a recorded version of that song. And it was really funny because I was listening to a lot of hip hop at the time. I was listening to tons and tons of hip hop. I went through this crazy weird phase where I was obsessed with like I love a lot of hip hop, and I try to bring that influence into the music for Quantum. I went through a whole period recently where I've been listening to lots of Run the Jewels. I love those guys to death. I really love Logic a lot as far as new hip hop stuff goes. I think his production is killer. I kind of grew up, in the, steeped in the world of the 80s and 90s hip hop, Public Enemy and KRS-One and Nas. Illmatic is probably my favorite hip hop album. So hip hop has always been a huge part of music, a big, huge genre of music that I've always loved immensely. So that I've always tried to have that as an influence in Quantum, and hopefully it is. And I've really taken a lot of influences from that, and then also even new stuff, like I said, Run the Jewels or newer, like more modern contemporary stuff. Even groups like Dojo Cat, I really like her a lot. She's a little bit more at times on the pop kind of world, but she's fabulous, but definitely hip hop based. So I went through this period where I was like listening, and I got into this one Lil Wayne album, the Carter Part Two. I got obsessed with that. I really love that album. It's got this real dark, kind of grimy vibe to it, and I was obsessed with that album. I used to listen to it all the time, and at the time I was watching a lot of werewolf movies. So in particular, I'd watched like the Howling a few times in a row, and I was listening to all of this, dark kind of Lil Wayne stuff from Carter Part Two. It's got this dark and kind of grimy vibe. So I wrote a song based off of off of my headspace at that time. So it's always interesting how that stuff comes about, and I do that a lot with the music for Quantum. Like I've said, music has a huge, huge impact, or I should say, movies have a huge, huge impact on writing for that band. So again, I can't recommend this movie enough. It's so great. Again, it's one of the most wild, like kind of cross pollination of styles. You got like science fiction, horror, and martial arts. Just incredible. You got it all, fused together. And you can't go wrong with that as far as I'm concerned. So it's utterly one of the most original takes on the whole like kind of vampire, mythology that I've ever seen. Just incredible. So 1983, amazing movie, Beast and the Magic Sword. This package is just incredible. Also, hours of special features. I'm excited. I've only actually seen this movie a couple times. I'm super excited to watch it again. So this is Jason Dean here at Film Fanatic headquarters. So I want to thank everybody for checking out the channel and supporting the channel. This has been a really fun ride, and I'm going to keep cranking out the videos. So I hope everyone has a great weekend, and we will see you soon. Peace.